Hello, and welcome to the 2020 series presented by the New York Film Academy. The 2020 series are conversations with creative visionaries about craft, creativity, and collaboration, the three legs of the triangle, the three legs of the chair, the stool, all necessary to be a wonderful filmmaker creator. I'm Liz Hinlein, creative director and filmmaker. We will have 20 minutes of creative craft conversation with our amazing guests. And then we'll have 20 minutes or so of opening up the floor to you guys, the amazing audience. This is a time to ask specific craft questions that you've been bugging about, that you can't get answers on YouTube, that your friends don't know, because we have a brilliant, seminal filmmaker in the room, Marc Sedaka, who is amazing, a great storyteller, and we're very lucky to have him. Hello, Marc, out in cyberspace. Hello, hi.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So I wanted the audience to know is like why I thought it was so cool to have you on is you come from being like a seminal dude in the industry. You were a writer, you had agents, you wrote for big shows like King of Queens, and had all that storytelling craft as a writer and a world builder. And then at some point you pivoted recently in the last few years to being a feature film editor. And just craft wise, what were things that opened up for you when you learned the craft of editing that you did not realize as a writer?
I think what editing taught me more than anything is what not to do, what not to have. I mean, I forgot which editor it was who said, I cut out the bad bits. And I think in many ways, editing is sort of like being a sculptor in that there's a negative process to it. It's eliminating things. And I think from a visual perspective, it taught me so much about telling a story visually in certain ways that screenwriting, you don't see it yet. You don't have the materials. You're relying more on the words. And I think as an editor, you can kind of see the future more and see what's necessary and what isn't.
And so now when you read, so when you read a script before, and I'm sure you read a bazillion scripts,
Yeah.
wrote a bazillion scripts. So you were looking at story, does the story work? Does the characters work? Does the art, am I feeling something? And then now that you look at a script, can you see below the maybe stilted dialogue that there is a heartbeat there?
Yeah, again, it's not so much stilted as extraneous. Something I've always loved, even as a screenwriter and as a director before that, was in streamlining, in finding truly what's necessary. And I think being an editor, you really develop that skill even more, and you see the repetition more in scripts, and it's always a thrill when a director will, when I have the opportunity to come in the script phase and to say to a director, the first half of this scene accomplishes everything. You really don't need this second half. And the thrill that they have to know that they're saving that much money and that much time and that much effort, because they can just cut that now instead of cutting it later. And that's really the fun for me.
And do you like, so say, do you prefer when a director brings like before they shot beside the script, like a shot list or storyboards or talking conceptually about the ups and downs, the flow, the rhythm of the edit? Is that things that you get into with a director?
Oh God, yeah. Now the problem is post is usually like the redheaded stepchild of the film shoot. It's production appears to be everything. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the writer gets the short shrift once you enter production, and the thought of post isn't even a consideration yet. So it's always great when there's a production that understands that, doesn't want to go that route, and brings in the editor at the stages you're talking about. Because I think it's certainly help for me to understand the project and help for them. The shot list obviously is key, especially when it comes to the real minutia, the details of it.
Mm-hmm.
The inserts are so key, and whether it be in pre-production or even in production, if I'm able to look at all the dailies when they're shooting and go, God, an insert of the book would just be perfect. And you just grab one of those, you know? They're happy, I'm happy. But certainly through all the stages, from script to shot list, it makes such a difference to have an editor's eye and an editor's mind involved in that process.
And you have to, obviously there's a whole, so the three films you make, the one you write, the one you shoot, and the one you edit. And have you found sometimes that you have to really guide the edit? It's not what you wanted is not on the screen. Like maybe you didn't get that day.
Inevitably. And I think, one thing, and I, like you, went to AFI for me for editing. And one of the things that they stress from the beginning is there's a lot of good editors, but when you're locked in a room with someone for 10 hours a day, you better have a good personality, you better get along. So there's definitely a decorum involved to be able to say to a director, I know what you want, but it's not there. And depending on the director is how much you can verbalize, but they're not in the back of the theater explaining what they wanted. So my job is to balance those two worlds. And if I'm the third prong of what you're saying, it's to marry the first prong of what they wanted in a script and the second prong of what they got in a production, and to find those two and make them speak the same language. And that's what I do.
And where do you find that you're ever sort of stepping on the toes of the writing at all? It's just because of your background?
I've been a writer before this. One of the things I hated about writing was being rewritten. You write a script and then bring in other writers to do rewrites. And by the time I made it to the screen, there was a movie that I made where I joked I should have just gotten the title by credit, because that's pretty much all that was contained by the time I was done. And you do find that in editing too, that you're brought on sometimes late in the process, and you are, in essence, rewriting another editor. So there's definitely a process involved in that.
So you've been, and your background with editing right now is mainly been film, feature, short. You haven't been in the TV land yet, or am I wrong?
It was something that I determined for myself that I wanted. I like the creativity of it, the give and take of it, that relationship between an editor and a director. And I was in a position where I could make those choices and really didn't want the grind of TV editing, which I knew well from being a TV writer. And I think in the hierarchy, what do they say for writers, being a playwright is the utmost, and then, being a feature writer, and then maybe a TV writer. And I think for editing, documentary is probably where an editor shines the most, then feature, then TV again. So I wanted to stick with the real creative give and take with the director.
Okay, just business-wise though, and especially you're also come from a business background. Okay, now you're the editor, so you are a for hire with the producers, and then typically the director hasn't paid for the film.
Yeah.
How have you found, where's that balance if say the director doesn't have final cut because they didn't pay for it, or who knows? Like someday, of course, everybody wants that, but
you
have to fight for it.
It brings up an interesting point, which is, we have these terminologies in our industry, and there's above the line and below the line. And there was an ego to, oh my God, I'm below the line. I'm up for hire now. And what I tell people, and I swear to God, I mean it, is I feel more power as an editor than I ever felt as a writer. As a writer, you're God until you sell it. And then someone pays you handsomely for your child to go away and let them raise it. As an editor, everything I do makes it to the screen. So there's that sense, getting closer to what you're saying. Again, it's the diplomacy of it. It's balancing who's in charge here. And I've had it. I mean, I've had shoots. I can think of one right in this seat where I had a director and I had a producer. And I felt them deciding who won in any argument. And, first order of business, first rule, keep your mouth shut and let them work it out. And, every once in a while, voice, what do you think of this kind of thing? but again, I think my personality works well with that. I would much rather be the guy listening to that argument than being in that argument. So yeah, there's definitely a power play, and it varies on every single shoot.
And I've always wanted to know this. So you have people, what does it feel like to have people behind your head yelling things at you?
So I set up very specifically, you can't see it here, but my director producer will sit on that end on a couch. And then over here, I have a monitor for them. And then in front of me, I do all my work. So I never let them see what I'm doing when I'm doing it. I do it, then I show it up there and they watch it over there. And I learned that actually from myself, from being a director. You get impatient and you say, no, I wanted it that way. And inevitably, and an editor has done it to me, gone, I'm doing it, just be quiet, So I've made a point that until I've kind of worked it out, they don't see it. So yeah, it's a very carefully constructed situation here.
And what made you feel the need, not the need, but that you went to graduates, you went to a high level graduate program, which is a grind, an incredible grind unto itself. Yeah. What made you feel that was the way to go, as opposed to saying night classes at UCLA for 10 weeks?
I tried the night classes. I for probably a good decade before I actually said, okay, I'm going to concentrate on editing, I would say to my wife ad nauseum, I should just be an editor. Every time a script didn't sell, every time I got rewritten, I should just be an editor. That's what I really want to do. That's what I'm good at. And through that decade, I tried the night classes and stuff. Mm-hmm. And you really can't learn this craft without immersing yourself in the craft. Mm-hmm. You can't learn it from a Linda, thing on Zoom, which I've tried. You can't learn it from going to classes. You forget it after a week. I, like you, did AFI, that ridiculously intensive 2 years. And I would say in that 2 years, I learned 5 to 10 years worth of stuff that I would have learned from just getting the odd job here or there. And it was my second master's. I got another one years and years ago from NYU for directing. So I'm the most educated filmmaker I know, or whatever that's worth.
It's worth a lot, and it is saying, and why do you feel that? Is it just being so myopic about the craft of editing that, or screenwriting, why the immersiveness of it?
Well, a lot of it is just the technology of it. Learning Avid is an extremely hard learning curve because it's been around since, and someone will correct me this, but I'm going to say 89 it's been around since. So it's built on an architecture that really doesn't exist and never existed before. We take for granted with any software that it mimics software we know, that all the pull downs are in the same place and the terminology is the same. Avid is really a tough learning curve. Premiere is to a certain extent also. So to sort of balance in your head what you want your brain to do to how it translates into that software takes a long time. And understanding, I think when I first started editing back in the 90s with my first master's degree, it was on the Steam Deck and it was cutting all the film. And that was more tangible, it was easier to do. Once you get into the technology of it, you really have to recondition your brain into understanding what that all means, making it second nature. And that's what those 2 years do a lot of.
100%, because you could never get to being a good Samaritan in your edit seat and dealing with personalities if you don't have the basics of the craft.
Right. And when people are, either behind me or in front of me on that couch and they're waiting to get what they want done, you got to be somewhat quick. I mean, I'm not at the level of some of these TV editors who you're like, holy shit, how are they doing that? But I am quick enough now that I get the job done. So that takes time.
Totally. But then you can move to the storytelling.
Yeah.
Like then once you have all that underway, you can move to the storytelling and then offer suggestions. Let me show you a different way we can approach this.
Right. Your brain concentrates on what it needs to concentrate on. It's like when you learn to drive and you're thinking about all the aspects of, is my blinker on? Am I doing this right? And you're not really driving. I'm driving now. I'm not thinking about driving.
So you put together a really cool scene for us that I thought was really interesting. And I just want you to talk us through. It's based on, you'll tell us a little bit of the story, but it sounded like you and the director walked through, we need to have an editing concept for this. We're not just telling the plot, this happens, this happens, this happens.
Right. And again, when you talk about the parallels between writing and editing, there are certain scenes that are harder to construct than others. And expository scenes are tremendously hard. You've got to get across a lot of information, and how do you make that interesting? So this scene that I was going to show, I actually was brought on as the editor after the first editor didn't work out. So they had a first cut of the movie, and this was what they considered the most problematic scene. It came right in the middle of the film, and just a little backstory about the film. It's about two brothers who inherit their mother's house after she died. They get there after the will reading and find that she has kept their estranged father in the basement for 20 years, and they thought he was dead. So tonally, there's a lot to deal with there, because the movie has some comedic elements, but it's meant to be serious. So it's kind of balancing that. And what they were looking for, and you touched on it a little, was sort of keeping it a bit disjointed. And a lot of directors will, point to examples of what inspired and what they wanted to do. And there's a Soderbergh film called Out of Sight. A lot of directors point to this scene with George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez, where you're hearing them, you're not seeing them, you're in one room, you're in another room. It's kind of taking different layers and levels. So the first 3.5 minutes you'll see is what I was given as to what it should be. Second 3.5 minutes are what it eventually became. And where I think it's improved is not only in the construction of it, but the storytelling of it, the tone, the pace, what we see when we see it, what's important in the beginning as opposed to the end, what to cut that maybe is extraneous. So yeah, if you want to show it.
Right before we show it, so on just the script that you read, was it broken down? Was the scene intercut in the way it was written?
No, the scene was not. I believe the flashbacks were presented correctly, but as far as when we maybe disjointed a little, that was all in the director's mind. And it's interesting when you have a director who wrote the script as opposed to one who didn't, you'll always have differences because this director did not write the script. So a lot of his conception of it came after the script.
Got it. Okay, awesome. So Charlie, let's play the scene, please.
He never touched you, but he was gonna. Mom came to my room one night, told me to wait till Dad passed out, and sneak out of the house and run to the Scops. I didn't even know she knew what he had been doing. I guess she just didn't know what to do about it. But that night, I never made it to the Scops.
Your mother said you were gonna run tonight. There you go. Hey, Mark. You know what? Fine. I'm sick of you anyway. You stay right there. You do not move. Get your ass away from that door.
No.
You know what's gonna happen to you. Ugh.
You get your brother. You get in the car, you wait for me there, okay?
She told me he'd never bother us ever again.
It's gonna be okay.
I assumed that meant he was dead.
But what did she want us to do?
I told you we were gonna need a drink. We gotta kill him.
What? Are you crazy?
What else is there to do?
Call the cops. But we can show them Mom's will.
What's that gonna do?
We'll tell them that Mom, we didn't know that our dad's been in the basement for 20 years.
Have you ever even spoken to a cop?
There's got to be something between calling the cops and killing him.
Well, look, this is a crime scene. No matter what. That means I don't get it. You don't get it. They get it. Mom woke me up one night, told me to wait till Dad passed out, then sneak out of the house and run to the scouts. I didn't think she even knew what he had been doing to me down in that basement. I guess she just didn't know what to do about it. But that night, I never made it to the scouts.
Your mother said you were gonna run tonight.
Let me go! Help!
You know what?
No!
Fine. I am sick of you anyway. You stay right there. You do not move.
He never touched you. But he was gonna.
Get your ass away from that door.
No.
You know what's gonna happen to you.
You get your brother. You get in the car, you wait for me there, okay?
She told me he'd never bother us again. I assumed that meant he was dead.
It's gonna be okay.
Why didn't you ever tell me?
She made me swear I wouldn't. What good would it have done you? We gotta kill him.
What? Are you crazy?
What else is there to do?
Call the police?
Have you ever even spoken to a cop?
There's got to be something between calling the cops and killing him.
Look, this is a crime scene. No matter what. That means I don't get the house, you don't get the money, they get it.
Okay, that's great. Very good. Totally different. My question, looking at that, was all that footage there? Because there were so many pieces that they didn't use in the initial edit. It felt like that's what they shot.
The only thing that wasn't in the original footage was the belt coming in. Everything else existed, and some of it just wasn't used for whatever reason. But when I was watching it, the thing that I was reminded of, and again, why I think it helps having been a writer, is as a writer, one of the adages I always went with is write what you see, what you want people to see. And as an editor, it's show what you want people to see. And there were so many things for me that my eye wasn't where I wanted it to be in that first one, even down to starting with the close on the liquor, which represented so much of that scene.
100%. And also I was always just confused why we were so far back from the two characters telling an intimate story.
Yeah.
And yes, and also it's a great proponent of sound. I'm huge about how sound design really
sound is
mood and the voiceovers, and it's just magical how you can really create the tone. I mean, that film, just out of curiosity, that film seemed very dark, not really any comedy. It could have gone totally farcy comedy with that concept.
That was about as dark as it came, but I think what was satisfying about that scene was the director's vision was realized, and that's all you really want to do as an editor. So that was very satisfying.
That's really great. I have a bunch of questions here, so I'm going to just jump in. And this is great. So at Tornam, hopefully at Tornam, I didn't totally script your name. As an editor, when do you decide to cut from one shot to another, especially in a dialogue scene? What's the motivation for the cut?
I think the answer is make sure there's motivation for a cut. It's when I first started, it was all about continuity. And I think it's one of those things that in a creative field where you think the most important thing is actually the least important thing. And, I forgot which famous editor it was who had 7 criteria of why you cut, and continuity is number 7. And so what you learn to do is not cut unless it's motivated by something. And a lot of it does become instinct, and does become what I said before about showing what you want to see. When I want to see that other character, that's when I'll cut.
Well, it's just interesting because a lot of, let's say, a lot of procedural TV is a lot of characters talking, so they must be on camera. And there's a way that it becomes less and less and less cinematic storytelling as we go down that direction.
But it is interesting, and I do enjoy sort of watching those shows and just seeing what they're doing. You rarely will see the ping pong of line person. They'll at least overlap the line here or there. And another thing that I noticed about watching that scene, the before and the after, eyes really tell the tale. And you're always looking for that little bit of a shift in an eye, whether it be catching onto the other character or looking away from the other character. And that will motivate the cut a lot, and when you'll do it.
Do you think a lot about more than conceptual design, let's say eye trace and shapes and forms? Does that sort of flow into your Bruce Block, let's say, isms?
It does, but probably not as much as some people. I'm so all about the character and the story and the tracking of it all. And a lot of times I'll miss a lot of stuff that when they're doing the quality control, they'll just find so many continuity errors because my brain's not there. Like you as a DP, I'm your worst enemy. Like I don't care, So be reframing things to get, make sure the eye's looking where it needs to look. And, so there's sometimes another pass that more addresses the look of it.
Right. And just so the visual, the framing and the composition, and what is that composition saying story wise and stuff like that.
Right. And we do have so many liberties now as an editor. I was saying before, when I worked on a steam back 20 years ago, we would just literally cut the film. Now it's more about, and I had an instructor at AFI who called it the intra frame of the movie, because it's not about the cut, it's about manipulating what's in the frame. I can cut people out, I can split screen different things. I mean, it's incredible where you can go with it to make things that weren't there. So that's a lot of the process also.
Do you have a favorite editor idol?
I can't say I do. I can say one of my teachers, or a few of my teachers at school probably are, because editing is one of those things like music where if you don't notice it, it's working. So it's very hard to know where the contributions lie on any given movie. So I could have movies that I love that I could say, oh my God, I worship the editor that did that. I don't know if the director dictated every cut. I don't know if they saved the picture. I can't really tell you. But there are some editors that I know who are just really good at their craft.
QM asks, what is the most difficult aspect about editing for you?
Like anything else, it's probably starting. It's probably looking at all those clips and saying, where do I just dive in? And it's interesting because I probably, as a writer, it was horrible to dive in because everything was so intangible. As an editor, it's a little easier, and I'm kind of a little better at knowing you might not get the flow right at first. You might not kind of get the rhythm going, but you got to just start it. But yeah, figuring out all the different takes is probably the biggest challenge.
And how do you, I guess, where do you feel is a successful relationship with a director for you?
Being on the same page. I think when you see a great film, what you're really seeing is everyone was making the same movie. And so to have that as a one-on-one, when a director will say, listen, here's really the type of film. I remember there was one film I did where I read the script, I didn't know what I was looking at. Spoke to the director, didn't really know what I was looking at. He said, watch, and what was the name of the movie? Requiem for a Dream. Watch Requiem for a Dream. I said, I know what this movie is. I know exactly what he wants to do. I knew what my hint music was going to be. I knew what the cuts were going to be. So once you have that simpatico with the director, you're gold.
Right, and then you can start from there, so you do not become derivative either.
Right, you do not become derivative either. And I think was another beauty of that is knowing what in that movie, at another movie where he said the lining. And I was like, I get it, I get it, thank you.
Yeah, it's that quick shorthand.
Yeah.
Miriama asks, how long does it take you to edit a film?
So I would say if it's a feature and you are brought in from the beginning, which most you are, you're working kind of on a one-to-one of the shooting schedule, maybe 2 days behind. So they'll shoot a day, they'll have to sync it all, the assistant editor will do some stuff on it. So maybe 2 days later, I'm seeing day one, and I will do an editor's cut of day one. And I will keep that pace so that if it's a 30-day shoot, 32 days later, I've at least constructed everything. Then I'll have another week or two to make my official editor's cut. So we're already a month and a half into it. Then probably another month and a half to work with the director. Then they have a test screening, then there's 3 or 4 weeks. So it's anywhere from 3 to 4 months of the process. At that point, it's out of my hand, it's into finishing. But even then, I'm usually on call to do different things.
And so with that, that's a chunk of time period. What
Yeah.
what causes you now, you know, is it trying out different genres? Is it the money? Like what causes you say, yes, I'm gonna do this?
I'll usually, if I have the time, I'll say yes to most anything just because I love cutting so much. But I would love more comedies. I mean, that's just specific to me. It seems right now, we discussed it the other day, with COVID, it's either hugely high budget films that were made, or it's like the ones under the radar that aren't following the rules necessarily.
Right.
And so it's been a lot of horror the past year. That seems to be the big
Right, that's interesting.
horror movie. And I don't watch horror movies. And,
Right.
and so it's a lot of, you know, trying to figure out what's the convention here, what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, I just did one where there's one scene where I looked away while I was editing it. So it was someone degloving themselves. They were like pulling this ring off and it was taking their finger off. And I edited it with peripheral vision. And I'm like, this sucks. I don't want to be doing this. But yeah.
Well, you know, I think actually it's really interesting to edit something or to work in a genre that you're not the fangirl of.
Yeah.
I think that then you bring something else to that, so it becomes a fresh thing.
It's true. You do avoid the tropes and the cliches when you don't know them. But I mean, we discussed this the other day too. That I find I can go cross genre more with editing than I could with writing. With writing, I would only write comedies, romantic comedies, teen comedies. Editing, a story's a story.
You mean you're not pigeonholed as much?
I'm not pigeonholed as much because they've already shot it. They've already done the genre work on it through production. So for me, it's just sort of going, oh, okay, I get it. They want this. Okay.
What's the storytelling work here?
Yeah, the music sometimes is a problem with the horror because there are certain cliches that you are meant to follow.
Right.
As far as where the jump scare, how it works, what the tension is. That there I'm learning a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's like you have to do the tropes and understand the tropes and then know when to pull them in. So it feels like you're getting ready for your Get Out, which would be a perfect marriage of your horror and your
probably so. Yeah, that'll be a great
that type of thing.
I said, you know, I saw Booksmart with my daughter, and you know, those two actresses just thrilled me because that was the kind of movie I would have written. And there were certain like cutaways to them that I would love to find that shot. I would love to find that reaction shot. That I love.
That is super fun. And what you know, now with your experience and someone wants to be an editor, what would you tell them? What do they need to be doing?
Oh God, they need to be obviously cutting as much as they can, and I think there's a company called Edit Stock where you can actually like get footage and start to cut it. So at least you're doing it. You're not just watching some tutorial on how to do it. And then like anything else, there is a process. If you can get an assistant editing job, go for it. I mean, that's the greatest. The only problem is you really need to be tech savvy to do that. I was fortunate enough when I got out of school, one of my instructors brought me on as his assistant for a feature, and I learned more from that than anything I could have done. So that was great.
And what did you learn specifically, do you think?
You know, everything. I mean, the day-to-day, the minutia of it, the process of it. It's just, you know, so many different aspects of the job that you can only learn from being on it. That was just great. And the politics of it, how he dealt with the director, how he dealt with the producers, how you deal with vendors is kind of just a big nitty-gritty of it.
Totally, and sometimes how to make those deals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's great. So, Marc, where can people? Where can people?
My wife is trying to come in. I'm saying no.
No, not yet, unless she wants to be on camera. Where, if people wanted to follow your career, or track you, or stalk you in Instagram, where could they find you?
Oh God, do people get emails on this? Is that a thing?
You could give an email if you'd rather, if you want an, or you give. We have a bunch of questions. We're not going to be able to get to them, so people might want to pick your brain a little bit if you're open to that.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, my email's on my website anyway. It's msedaka@gmail.com. And the website is marcsedakaeditor.com. And that just shows, a bunch of clips of things I've done, which is also was a big discussion about, does an editor have a reel, and do they show clips? Do they show whole movies? So, for me, it was scenes, like movies that I have on there.
That's really great. Well, I'm so happy for you, and it's so good. Thank you, Charlie, for posting Marc's info for everybody. So feel free to reach out just with your editorial questions. And this is just so great. You really have such a passion for storytelling, and as well as like a real craft. And it's such a joy to talk to you.
Great. I love just talking about it because I enjoy it so much.
That's really wonderful. And, that's the point of doing it at times. If you don't love it, it's a hard career to do.
It's true.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. We are at the end of our time, and thank you, New York Film Academy, for hosting the 2020 series. And thank you, Marc, for all your input and lending us into your craft and insight.
Thank you so much for having me. Great.